Many years ago, long before cars and buses could be seen navigating country roads, in fact, before there were roads at all, our ancestors lived a very simple life. There were no houses or apartments, no computers or smartphones, and certainly no televisions. Still, they were happy. Instead of fighting over whether they should watch Paw Patrol or Miraculous, children gathered around crackling campfires with their parents and listened intently to the legends told by their grandparents. 10,000 years ago, Emma and her twin brother Noah were two such children. Every night, whatever the season, they huddled with their mum and dad, their faces bathed in the warm orange glow of a flickering fire, and waited anxiously for the arrival of their grandfather. They knew that he would fill their evening with wonder. This evening would be no different. As their grandfather settled into his usual position, legs crossed and poking the fire to send thousands of sparks into the billowing smoke, Emma and Noah were ready for magic. Clearing his throat, Grandfather announced that tonight he would share the legend of the last unicorn. Emma and Noah nodded their heads in anticipation. "Well, here is what I know about that," said Grandfather, tilting his head and pursing his lips as if to convey a grave and powerful truth. "I don't think it was in my own grandfather's time, but maybe a few grandfathers before him. There lived in this very valley two young twins who were also called Emma and Noah. Their grandfather, who I'm sure was much smarter and braver than me, shared with them a time when people and unicorns lived happily side by side. Over time, they learned each other's language and could talk quite freely together. People would take care of the land and make sure that there was always plenty of food for the unicorns. For their part, the unicorns had the magical ability to make medicines in their horns, and this helped the people stay healthy. Very occasionally, because unicorns were nothing if not proud, they would invite a child to sit on their back. Although they wouldn't admit it, unicorns loved the way children stroked their silky manes. But all this came to an end when a giant who lived in the neighboring valley grew jealous of the great friendship between people and unicorns. In a rage, he corralled all the unicorns in the valley and marched them over the hills and mountains into his own valley, and from there over the next hills and mountains into an uninhabited valley beyond. People and unicorns were very sad. They pleaded with the giant to let them meet, but the giant was firm. There would be no more communion between people and unicorns. After many months, one brave unicorn, who was widely respected by the other unicorns, decided that he needed to do something. He thought that the giant had perpetrated a major miscarriage of justice, and he wanted to reverse it so that people and unicorns could live together again. He brewed a very strong magical medicine in his horn and hatched a plan to put the giant into a deep sleep. One night, when the ground was shaking from the snores of the giant, the unicorn climbed to the top of the mountain. As the unicorn looked down, the giant let out a blood-curdling snort, and his eyes opened sneakily. The unicorn had been spotted. Knowing that this could be his only chance to right the wrong, the unicorn charged down the mountainside into the valley where the giant was now stretching to his full, awesome height. As the giant's arm swung like a pendulum, barely missing the unicorn's head, the unicorn made a final run and pierced the giant's ankle with his horn. Soon the sleeping potion began to work, and the giant dropped to his knees. But before he fell into a deep sleep, the giant summoned all his magical powers and cast a spell on both people and unicorns. They would remain separated, and if they ever attempted to meet again, the giant would wake and destroy them both. And that, said that ancient grandfather, is why we can never pass through the neighboring valley where the giant still sleeps, and visit the unicorns that still roam in the valley beyond. "Oh," said Emma, listening to her modern-day grandfather, "so this is why we don't see unicorns anymore." "Not quite," said the grandfather. "That was just the beginning of the legend. Today you can walk into the neighboring valley without fear of running into the giant, and go into the next valley, where you will find no unicorns. But that was not the case when my ancestor told his story. Here I can take over and tell you what happened after that fateful night when my ancestor told his story to your ancestors, Emma and Noah. That night, after listening to their grandfather's story, Emma and Noah couldn't sleep. Try as they might, they were so excited to hear the story of the giant and the unicorns that they talked about it all night. They wondered what the giant looked like, and if he would really wake were they to trek into the unicorn valley beyond. Tired from being awake all night, Emma and Noah slept most of the following day. But by the time the sun went down, they were wide awake and plotting their adventure. It wasn't that either of them came up with the idea and led the other. They both just knew what they had to do. So it was that they crept stealthily out of their camp and beyond hearing range of their slumbering parents. Soon they were in the foothills, and in what seemed like no time at all, they were on top of the first mountain range, looking down upon the sleeping giant. He was a monster. His head was so enormous that it filled the bottom of the valley, creating a huge dam of water. A few hundred yards below his head, his feet dangled over the edge of an escarpment that had been carved over the years by the river that flowed from the dam. Beyond the giant's feet, Emma and Noah could see the river widen into an estuary, and beyond that a great ocean, silver in the moonlight. Emma and Noah scurried down the mountainside towards the giant, being careful not to dislodge rocks or break branches that might alert the giant to their presence. As they drew closer to the giant, they could see that there was a passage beneath his knees to the other side of the valley. They were terrified, but so anxious to see the unicorns that they overcame their fear. Ever so gently, they waded through the shallow river that flowed beneath the giant's knees and passed slowly to the other side of the valley. Once there, they began their ascent of the final mountain range. As they approached the mountain summit, their hearts were pounding, not with fear, but with anticipation. The sun was now rising over the distant ocean and casting a warm cloak of reds, oranges, and yellows over the verdant valley below. There, in that magical valley, they could see many white, horse-like creatures in the distance. Could they be unicorns? There was only one way to find out. All memory of their grandfather's cautionary tale of the giant's spell had been erased from their minds. It wasn't that they remembered and decided to defy him. They were just so enthralled with the possibility of seeing and speaking with the unicorns that nothing else seemed to matter to them. Emma and Noah climbed down the mountainside. As rocks gave way to scree and scree to lush vegetation, their long night's journey over 2 mountain ranges was rewarded. The horse-like creatures were unicorns. Shocked by the presence of people and fearful of the giant's promised reprisal, the unicorns sought cover in the forest. As they galloped away, they failed to notice the young unicorn Nawa, whom they had left behind. Nawa was as curious about people as Emma and Noah were about unicorns. And seeing how saddened Emma and Noah were by the flight of the other unicorns, it wasn't long before he approached them. Nawa shared lots of unicorn stories with them, including the story of how the giant almost destroyed the valley, and how, while there used to be unicorns in every valley, and they lived side by side with people, now there were only the few with whom he lived in this valley, safe from the sleeping giant. Now Emma and Noah remembered their grandfather's story, and were overcome with fear that the giant might wake and do what he had promised. Emma and Noah told Nawa that they would have to leave, and started their ascent up the mountainside. Nawa walked with them, sharing more stories along the way. Halfway up the mountain, Nawa spotted a small cave. His legs were aching and he was tired. Nawa said goodbye to Emma and Noah before heading into the cave, where he fell fast asleep. As Emma and Noah tentatively approached the mountain summit leading to the giant's valley, they saw the giant's bald head rising above the mountains like a menacing moon. The giant stood, and towering above his valley and the hills on either side, he picked up boulders from the riverbed and hurled them into the unicorn valley. The boulders flew like meteors through the morning sky, laying the valley to waste along with its unicorns. But, safe in his cave halfway up the mountain, Nawa was spared. Woken by the fury surrounding him, Nawa stepped outside the safety of the cave and was spotted by the giant. He made his way down the valley towards the mouth of the river and the ocean beyond, his escape aided by the giant's unsteady morning gait. Nawa galloped along the riverbank and came to a skidding halt beside the waterfall, where the river plunged into the churning waters of the ocean below. He glanced up to see the giant's hand hovering above his head and ready to grab his horn. Nawa took a final breath and made a triumphant leap into the ocean. Reaching out to take his revenge on the final unicorn, the giant stretched beyond the point of no return. Unable to regain his balance, the giant too plummeted towards the ocean below. Emma and Noah watched from the safety of the now distant mountain, concerned that their escapade would draw the ire of their parents and grandparents. But when they returned home, they learned that they had nothing to fear. Everyone had been so worried about them that they were hugged for what seemed like hours. When they finally got to tell the story of their time with Nawa, everyone across the valley applauded the bravery of the last unicorn, who had rescued them by leaping into the ocean and taking the giant with him. Soon, the people of the valley, freed from the fear of the giant, were able to spread across the land, occupying every valley and every mountain. Even today, everyone knows the special gifts that unicorns bestow. By this point in Grandfather's story, the fire that had burned brightly just hours before had become a pit of gently smoking embers. Emma and Noah, who had been awe-stricken just moments before, were now yawning and not far from sleep. As their heavy eyes struggled to stay open, their grandfather closed his story with the following revelation. Since that day, many years ago, no living person has seen a giant or a unicorn. But deep in the ocean, blue whales and narwhals are thought by many to be the spiritual descendants of that giant and that very last unicorn.